Hey, it's Kevin here. I just want to say a quick thank you to all my weekly listeners. I know that this episode was delayed and I really appreciate your patience. It always makes me smile when I see that the episode has already gotten some plays when I wake up in the morning after it's been uploaded. You all make my Mondays a lot better, and I just wanted to say thank you for that. I also just wanted to update you all and let you guys know that the reason why the episode was delayed a week was due to a medical emergency in my family. And I am glad to say, though, that my family is doing better now and that we are back on track. I had everything ready to go for recording, and unfortunately, as many of you might come to know, that life just sometimes loves to interrupt our everyday routine. We come to find out that things won't always work out the way that we might want them to. And in my opinion, these sudden interruptions, they can either make or break us, right? Before I started viewing life differently and shifting my mindset, I used to get angry and sad about these interruptions because it seemed like they were just happening far too often in my life, and that I just started to feel like I was stuck in life and not able to move forward because something always came up that interrupted my plans. So I became frustrated, angry, asking like, why does this have to happen to me, and those type of things, especially since I personally like to be in control and I don't really like surprises. But you know what, one day I realized that I am still in control, that yes, while I can't control outside forces like someone getting sick or someone getting hit by a car, what I can control is how I react to it. I can control how I choose to let it impact me mentally and how much it's going to disrupt my life. Especially being a DACA recipient and immigrant, right? We never know what could come tomorrow. For all we know, one day we could just wake up without status in this country, and that I can't control. What I can control is how I choose to live my life, right? Everything's perspective, and my perspective is that I don't need status in one country to live my life to the fullest. I'm equipped with the tools that I need to succeed, and no one can take that from me. This is why when life gets in the way, I prefer to learn from it and view it as an experience rather than let it consume me. And then I'm resentful and I start to close myself off to all that life has to offer, because if you live your life viewing everything as an experience, well, then we're constantly growing as humans, right? Because we simply cannot develop as humans without experience. The only way to grow is through pain, through learning, and through those struggles, as well as through love, happiness, and pleasure. So, with all that said, I send much love to all of you, and I always appreciate every single one of you for taking the time to tune into this podcast. It really means a lot. I always look forward to putting out new content for you all, and I hope that you enjoy today's episode. What is going on, everyone? This is the Leo podcast, where we talk about various educational topics, especially those impacting the Latin American community. For today's episode, we're going to be going over some stats from the 2020 census, as well as data from the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics that show the average monthly income of a Hispanic worker and some other important relevant data. Because honestly, sometimes we just need to be reminded that we are the shit and that all of us in this country contribute to its economic success. The Latino market measured in GDP is literally in the trillions. A GDP that, by the way, is growing at 8.6% faster than China, faster than India, and nobody is talking about it. So that's the goal for today's episode, to remind us all that we are an important and valuable part of this country and that our contributions should be recognized. If you listen to this episode on the day that it is released, then that means today is Monday, October 31st. Happy Halloween. And if you want early access to episodes and bonus content, then head on over to our patreon.com/latinamericaneo and become part of our Palomitas community. But if you're not a patron yet, no worries. You can still enjoy this episode. It's packed with great content, so sit back, relax, and enjoy. In case you're not aware, the Hispanic community in the United States is actually one of the groups with the highest population growth. Don't believe me? Well, let's look over the 2020 United States Census. The total population living in this country in 2020 was 333 million inhabitants. Of those 333, 62 million are people of Latino origin, which, if you do the math, is equivalent to 18.7% of the total American population. And if you're curious, here are the top 3 states where we can mostly be found. New Mexico coming in at number 1 with 47.7%, California taking second place with 39.4%, and finally Texas coming in at 39.3%. Did the top 3 surprise you at all? Was it what you expected? Let me know. I would love to hear from you. Now, if we decide to take this deeper and convert it to work, well, then we would represent 17.3% of the workforce in the United States, which, by the way, is estimated to increase to 30% by 2060. And if you're curious, the workforce is distributed in different areas, ranging from things like financial activities, construction, agriculture, fishing, hotels, bars, restaurants, etc. You get the point. Now, when it comes to our monthly income, according to the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, the average monthly earnings of full-time Hispanic workers is around $3,448. But of course, these wage rates do vary depending on things like the type of job, the states and cities where we live, and obviously how much each state spends on average. Let's take the state of California as an example. In California, the average annual salary may be slightly higher, but the cost of living is also much higher. And of course, we can't talk about pay without talking about the pay gap. Over the years, Hispanics have been growing and each generation is overcoming obstacles. But there is something that still keeps us at a disadvantage to this day. And that is none other than the wage gap. Did you know that the US-born Latinos enjoy higher wages than foreign-born Latinos, but both groups are still below the average salary of a white American? This means that a Latino American earns only 73 cents for every dollar a white American receives. So yeah, let that one sink in for a bit. There are also other factors that we can look to when it comes to these big differences in salaries. The obvious one is language. Many Latinos, when they arrive in the United States, do not speak English, and that could obviously prevent them from climbing to better salary positions. Take my sister and me as an example. When we arrived in the United States, we both were still young. I was 7 and her 8. And even though we only knew Spanish, we were young enough to pick up English quickly because not only were we at an age where we were just absorbing a bunch of stuff, but we were also taking ESL classes at school. So obviously we picked up English a lot faster than our parents. And because my sister and I picked up English and perfected it over the years, we now make a lot more than our parents whose English is not as perfect. This also brings me to another factor: education. Today, many Latinos are struggling to take college and improve their living conditions. According to the National Center for Education Statistics, in 2020, the number of Hispanics that enrolled in college reached 3.6 million, which is a significant drop when compared to 2019, which was 3.7 million. And of course, while it is expected to increase, the pandemic definitely could have been a factor in why there was that drop in enrollment compared to 2019. But we also have to consider the higher costs of universities and the few resources that are available to Hispanic families, which make it increasingly difficult to obtain a university degree. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back after this quick break. You're listening to the Leo Podcast. I'm Kevin Munoz. Support for today's episode comes from my Patreons. If you enjoy the show and are looking for bonus content and to further support the show, then head on over to patreon.com/latinamericaneo or visit my website latinamericaneo.org to join the growing Leo Podcast community. Because the learning doesn't stop with this episode. There's also some sick merch on my website, everything from shirts, coffee mugs, and tote bags. All info will be at the bottom in the show notes. Now let's get back to today's episode. Another important factor that could also influence salaries is adapting to the financial and credit system of the United States. This is something that a lot of personal finance influencers in the community talk about and are always stating the importance, including myself. It's no surprise that many Latinos come from financial systems that work differently from the United States. So, understanding how it works and what to do to improve and adapt can be something very difficult. For example, things like taking out a loan to buy a home or buying a car are mostly based on credit score or good savings. But achieving that is harder than it sounds when you not only have to learn a whole new language, but also an entirely different financial system. The good news is that between 2021 and 2031, job opportunities in the United States are expected to increase from 158.1 million to 166.5 million, a growth of 8.3 million jobs, which could be more opportunities for us Latinos. As it stands today, Latinos continue to have problems improving our lifestyle, but I personally believe that it's up to the young generations to give our best effort every day and obtain a better place in this society. I mentioned earlier in the intro of the episode how the Latino market measured in GDP is in the trillions. So let's take a deeper dive into that as well. Now, despite Latinos having to deal with marginalization in some boardrooms, overall US Latino buying power and economic output actually grew during the pandemic. In 2020, according to a report by the nonprofit Latino Donor Collaborative, Latinos spent $1.84 trillion, representing a consumption market larger than the entire economies of Canada or South Korea. According to the report, this is most likely due to a strong workforce that rebounded quickly despite a disproportionate rate of infections. It also says the total economic output of US Latinos reached $2.8 trillion in 2020, which is comparable to the GDPs of UK and India. Also, pay in low-wage positions like hospitality and service jobs, in which Latinos are overrepresented, by the way, also grew over the last couple of years as businesses struggled to find workers. Taking a deeper dive and using Texas as an example, which as previously mentioned, is one of the top 3 states in which Latinos live. I found from a business coalition that Hispanic Texans in 2019 earned $213.7 billion, with more than $50 billion going to taxes, leaving them with $162.4 billion in spending power that can be reinvested in local communities. Hispanic Texans are also helping drive population growth in the state. Between 2010 and 2019, the US-born Hispanic population grew by 26.7%, while the foreign-born Hispanic population grew by 8%. In 2010, 37.7% of the overall population in Texas was Hispanic. That number grew to 39.8% in 2019. Hispanic Texans also play a crucial role in meeting the state's workforce needs. In 2019, 66.7% of the overall Hispanic population and 66.4% of the foreign-born Hispanic population were active in the labor force, compared with the 64.1% of the non-Hispanic population. Perhaps most importantly is that Hispanic Texans hold substantial voting power. In 2019, there were nearly 5.7 million eligible Hispanic voters, including more than 960,000 naturalized citizens. Overall, the Hispanic population made up 31.1% of the electorate, including Hispanic naturalized citizens, who on their own made up 5.2%. But despite this, did you know that the Austin area median Latino household earns almost $27,000 less than the median white household per federal data? This is why it's important that we are aware of how much we are making, especially if you are someone who is doing the same job or oftentimes more than your coworker, but they're getting paid significantly more. And so I tell you all this because by arming ourselves with the knowledge and data to back up our claims, we can demand a seat at the table and make real change that can have a positive impact on our communities. That's all for today on the Leo Podcast. I'm Kevin Munoz, and as always, feel free to send me a message with your thoughts or with any interesting topic that you'd like to see covered. And for those of you on Patreon, I will see you there. Otherwise, I will see you all in next week's episode. Thank you for listening to today's episode. If you enjoyed it, please share it with a family or a friend and rate it 5 stars on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. It helps tremendously in order to bring more awareness and educational resources to our community. For more information and to stay up to date with what I'm doing, you can follow me on Instagram at Latinoamericaneo. And if you need more information and resources, you can visit my website, latinoamericaneo.org. I'm Kevin Munoz. This has been the Leo Podcast, and I'll see you next time.